Hello, this is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist with your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday here on August the 23rd. So I'm coming to you today from Malta, Illinois, home of our newest Golden Harvest Research and Development Innovation Center, where I'm actually helping out with new seed advisor training and talking to my fellow agronomists across the eastern U.S. about the future of our products and what we need out there. And so earlier this week, I did, though, get a chance to spend some time walking fields with customers and seed advisors. Got to fly my drone over a bunch of corn and soybean fields and even discussed what we can do to still kind of positively affect this year's crop. And we're going to try to hit on some of those things today in our podcast. But first, as always, like to check in with MSU's Enviro weather site. This week, it does show that crop progress continues be ahead of normal, but cooler temperatures have brought us down to really only being about 2 to 3 days ahead of normal. So dropping into the specifics, if we look at the East Lansing area, just shy of 2,000 heat units at 1971, 40 units above the 5-year average. Over on the west side in Allegan County, we broke the 2,000 mark at 2017 heat units, 38 above the 5-year average. Down in southeast Michigan, that Deerfield, Blissfield area, 2155 for heat units, which is actually 76 above the 5-year average. And then Sandusky up in the thumb, 1923 there for 71 heat units above their 5-year average. Wrapping up the state in the Ithaca area, and they are 76 heat units above the 5-year average at 2104. So next week does look to be in the mid-80s for the day temperatures, mid-60s for night temperatures. That should actually gain us some above normal heat units again and add to that accumulation this year. So excited about that. Now, hot topics this week included actually finding some Downey mildew, seeing runts and stunts in some corn in places, and then just more and more yellow soybeans showing up. So let's break each of these down into their causes, and then we'll kind of discuss if there's any actions we can take yet this year. So starting with Downey mildew. So this actually came from some photos that I received midweek from a field in West Michigan, north of Grand Rapids area. And the photos, they showed these pale green to light yellow spots which they enlarge into these bright yellow spots, and in the center of those spots, they eventually actually turn brown, and they have kind of a yellow margin or border around them. Now, Downey mildew's a very weather dependent and most likely to occur during periods of cool, wet weather. Of course, that's what we've had a lot of here lately. And, it attacks those younger leaves more on the top of that plant where we're going to see it first. So the other thing is pods can be infected, and that's going to create this kind of dull white appearance, and it's going to partially cover those seeds with this little bit pale coating of these fungal spores at harvest. So, the good news is that this disease really hardly ever reduces yield. So fungicides, this time of the year probably are not recommended for management, but we want to look at cultural practices in the future to reduce the risk of Downey mildew. So that would, of course, include planting, make sure we plant clean, certified seed. We're rotating out of soybeans in any fields that maybe show some symptoms this year. And then, of course, managing that crop residue because the Downey mildew fungus, it'll survive in that crop residue as well as on the surface of seed. And so it's also a really good reason why we like to see a good seed treatment on there to keep that coming into fields. So one we don't talk about very often, but seeing it this year. Secondly, runts and stunts. So walking numerous corn fields this past week, the good news is I'm actually seeing some really great tip fill on most of the ears across a fairly wide geography and across even some of those hybrids that sometimes tend to tip back fairly easily. But the bad news is when I'm in those fields, I'm seeing way too many plants that I would consider runts or stunted plants that they're mixed in with the good stalks. Now we know that uneven emergence in the spring of the year Even corn plants that emerge just a day or two later than their neighbors, they've got a high likelihood of not producing a full-size ear, and this does look to be the case in these fields because you'll see a number of perfect size ears in a row, and then you get these periodic plants, these reduced diameter stalks and ears that in many cases are almost half the size or less of the ears around them. So, though we can't change this issue now, boy, we sure can make sure that we don't count these plants when we're doing yield checks because they're just not, viable ears in a lot of cases. And we need to take a long, hard look at our planter prior to next year's planting season just to make sure that it is in tip-top condition before we create this problem again in next year's crop. So finally, let's talk about yellow soybeans. So obviously the causes of these are numerous, and we've discussed a lot of reasons for yellow soybeans over the previous podcast, but I did want to bring this back to you because walking some of these fields, it's been interesting that some of those April planted soybeans are actually starting to senesce or mature naturally already out there. This usually shows up as a more uniform yellowing across the entire field, and that's a good sign, that we're moving closer to harvest. But I'm also seeing a lot of other reasons for yellowing out there, and those typically show up more in patches across the field. Now, these certainly include a lot of sudden death. We talked a lot about that last week. And additionally, I'm seeing actually more and more spider mites. We've talked a little bit about that. And we see those typically around the more of the edges of the field, and that looks a little bit more browning than yellowing. And then unfortunately, we're just seeing more and more of those dark, called dead heads, or those dead soybeans sticking their heads out above the canopy. And that's just that true indicator that we're seeing more and more white mold showing up in these fields. We've talked about that previously as well. So again, not much we're going to do about those problems this year, but shoot, got to know what's going on out there now so we can make better plans for how we're going to manage those issues next year. So with that, folks, I certainly hope you had a great week. This is Charles Scoville, your Golden Harvest agronomist. This is your Agronomy in Action Focus Friday. Have a great weekend.